Now from the Vatican, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and around the world, particularly our German friends who are looking in this week. Welcome to this special edition of The World Over Live from Rome. Preparations are underway to select a new pope here, even as the cardinal electors have yet to establish a start date for the conclave. The American cardinals have been silenced, in the media at least. We'll tell you why, and more importantly, the reasons behind it. Joining us to analyze this historic moment is the president of the Faith and Reason Institute, Dr. Robert Royal, Father Roger Landry of the Diocese of Fall River, Massachusetts, and Father Gerald Murray of the Archdiocese of New York. Now, I know many of you have questions about the process of a conclave, as well as some of those reports you've been reading swirling around this event. Send those questions to worldover@ewtn.com. We will try to answer them not only on this show, but throughout the week. But first, here's the brief news from the world over this week. Princes of the Church have gathered in Rome for the coming conclave. The last of the 115 cardinal electors, the Cardinal of Ho Chi Minh City, joined the college on Thursday. The Congregation of Cardinals, which has been holding meetings all week, has yet to set a date to begin this conclave. Pope Benedict, in one of his last acts, altered conclave rules, allowing the cardinals, if they so choose, to begin a conclave prior to the normal 15-day waiting period following the vacancy of the chair of St. Peter. Media have been citing unnamed Vatican sources who were projecting, perhaps spinning, that a conclave date would begin by March 8th. So much for those reports. At a press conference earlier this week, Cardinal Archbishop of Boston, Sean O'Malley, spoke about the delay.
I think this is the most important decision that some of us will ever make, and we need to give it the time that's necessary. I believe the feeling of the cardinals is we want to have enough time in the general congregations so that when we go to the conclave itself, it's a time of decision, and that the general congregation is the time of discernment.
And the Sistine Chapel was not the only thing being sealed and prepped for the upcoming conclave. On Wednesday, the Congregation of Cardinals imposed a gag order on its members. The non-binding agreement was purportedly the result of leaks to Italian media, divulging details of the private congregation meetings. Daily press conferences conducted by the U.S. contingent of cardinals have ceased in light of the media blackout. They were becoming increasingly popular among the news-starved international press corps here in Rome. The Americans were the only cardinals regularly taking questions about these meetings. Now, the Vatican has denied it exerted any pressure on the U.S. cardinals to keep quiet. During its own press conference, spokesman Father Federico Lombardi made clear that the Holy See considers this week's pre-conclave meetings to be secret and part of the solemn process of choosing a pope. To be clear, the Americans had nothing to do with the leaks in the Italian media. We'll explore the possible reasons for this in our next segment. And the reign of one of South America's most controversial leaders has come to an end. Venezuela's President Hugo Chavez died of respiratory complications on Tuesday, following a 2-year battle with cancer. He was 58. Chavez quickly transformed Venezuela into a socialist nation through class warfare rhetoric and the nationalization of large portions of the country's economy. The bishops of Venezuela often found themselves at loggerheads with Chavez, their statements of opposition more pastoral than political to Chavez's abuse of power, the country's erosion of democratic freedoms, and floundering economic policies were met with biting verbal condemnation. The relationship hit a low point in 2010 when Chavez called Caracas Cardinal Jorge Urosa a Neanderthal and a bum. Upon Chavez's death, the Secretary General of the Venezuelan Bishops' Conference offered his prayers for Chavez and called for national unity. The cardinals gathered in Rome also issued a telegram to mark Chavez's passing. And the Chaldean Catholic Church enthroned its new patriarch on Wednesday. During a ceremonial mass held amid tight security in Baghdad, 64-year-old Archbishop Louis Sacco became the Patriarch of Baghdad. He replaced retired Cardinal Emmanuel Deli. The bishops of the Eastern Rite Church chose the former Archbishop of Kirkuk as its new leader in January. Patriarch Sacco said he will push for dialogue with Muslim clerics, both Sunnis and Shiites, to ensure harmonious coexistence and cooperation in Iraq. Since the 2003 coalition invasion of Iraq, Christians there have suffered repeated violence by Islamic militants, and hundreds of thousands have fled the country. Back in the U.S., the USCCB, the Bishops' Conference, announced this week that it will commit $800,000 to immigration reform efforts. According to Bishop Jaime Sota, head of the Bishops' Subcommittee for the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, these grants will strengthen the capacity, quote, of our institutions to help immigrant families come out of the shadows and participate more actively in American society, end quote. The bishops say the funds will help in promoting education in parish, grassroots organizing among agencies, mobilizing political support from Catholics across the nation, and assisting communities that will benefit from any eventual reform legislation. In the past year, the U.S. bishops have committed more than $3.5 million to grassroots organizations working locally on immigration reform. And although Pope Emeritus Benedict has declared himself a simple pilgrim, he's still a celebrity. So it wasn't going to take long for the paparazzi to find paparazzi. The Italian tabloid Key published the first retirement photos of the former pope. The long-lens shot captured in the Castel Gandolfo Gardens shows Benedict clad in a white cassock, jacket, scarf, and baseball cap, taking a stroll with his personal secretary, Archbishop Georg Ganswein. Since his retirement, Vatican reports said Benedict was serene, quiet, and prayerful, and that he has also been spending time listening to music and reading. Walks while praying the rosary were also mentioned, as that photo attests. When we return, Father Roger Landry and Rob Royal will join us on set to discuss the challenges facing the Church. We'll also bring you the latest preparations underway for the coming conclave. The world over from Vatican City continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to this special edition of The World Over from Rome. Even without a conclave date, the Holy See is preparing for the big event nonetheless. The Sistine Chapel is closed to visitors, and just look at what's underway inside. The raised floor is being installed, the windows are being blocked so no one may see in or out, and the famous stove that will emit the black and eventually white smoke declaring that a new pope has been elected is being installed. There are two stoves, actually, one for burning the ballots and one for burning the chemicals that create that famous white or black smoke. Then there's the question of the vestments. The Vatican has ordered new vestments that will confront the Pope once he's elected. Gamarelli's, the famous clerical clothier, has the small, medium, and large papal vestments in their window. Now, these will be placed in the Room of Tears. That's the tiny spare room off the Sistine Chapel where the Pope confronts not only his fate, but the clothes he will wear for the remainder of his life. Depending on the new Pope's size, he'll choose either small, medium, or large papal garb. And you know a papacy is officially over when the Pope's floral coat of arms in the Vatican gardens is dug up. That's what happened on Thursday in the gardens. Pope Benedict's seal is no more. The prime location, which you can see from the cupola of St. Peter's, awaits a new coat of arms. The gardens may no longer have Benedict's coat of arms, but they'll soon have Benedict. Joining me now to discuss the very important business that's been occurring over the last few days here in Rome is Father Roger Landry of the Diocese of Fall River, Massachusetts, and Robert Royal, President of the Faith and Reason Institute and the proprietor and editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org. Great to see you both. Thank you for being here. And we've got quite a journey ahead of us. Now, much of this pre-conclave period is what I call the getting to know you phase, where the cardinals meet each other, they speak frankly, and they focus on electing a new pope. Now, there's much controversy about that start date, and the media has been making a great deal about why this is being delayed. But delay might actually be a good thing, right, Rob?
Well, it's a good thing if you think that what has to happen is for the cardinals to get to know one another better, and it's obviously some of them do, but many of them also know one another quite a bit. The downside of this is, as we talked about earlier in the show, that there's a lot of gossip in Rome. There are a lot of high feelings right now. So the longer that it goes on, we may find that there's a kind of a negative side in addition to the getting to know you side, and that is that rumors start to spread in gossip.
Getting to know you too much, is that what that's called? Father Landry, your take on the dynamic here as you see it among these cardinals and in the wider circle here in Rome?
There's a plus and a minus to the delay. I think the plus is, as the aphorism goes, the longer this period of conversation before the conclave, the shorter the conclave. And the shorter the period of these conversations, the longer the conclave. I would much rather be forced to be patient now than later, waiting for that smoke to come on up. I also think that the frustrations can build inside that room. Some of the reports that we're hearing is that the cardinals are being bored out of their mind listening to reports rather than having those types of frank, not just get to know you conversations, but get to know you at a level so that they would be confident voting for you to become the leader of the entire Catholic family across the world. And so it can be counterproductive when that type of quality conversation isn't allowed, and instead you're filling it with what they would consider junk.
Yeah, and we will talk in a bit about what's actually being said in those general congregation meetings. Now, part of this process during this period consists of cardinals reflecting on the major issues facing the Church. Now, this is an interview with Cardinal George Pell of Sydney, Australia. He spoke with our producer, Mary Shevlin, about Pope Benedict's effect on the liturgy. I want to use this to have a discussion about the impact of Benedict on the liturgy and what the next Pope's role here might be. Here's Cardinal Pell.
I hope we don't lose the momentum that we've gained towards the restoration of a proper sense of worship in the liturgy. He said something which I didn't appreciate early enough, and that is that bad liturgy is one of the things that contributed to the sort of problems that we have.
Your reaction to what Cardinal Pell said there, that the liturgy and the form it was in led to so many of the problems we saw in the Church?
Pope Benedict, during his papacy, said that one of the unfortunate things that happened after the Second Vatican Council is that the liturgy became a workshop for specialists who were trying to design it more or less so that we were worshiping ourselves. He said the liturgy became a self-enclosed circle with the priest as the presider, facing the people, and instead of everybody turning toward God and making our worship principally about God, it became principally about us. And so that was one of his main concerns, and what he did personally with a lot of his examples celebrating the Mass as Pope was to show us that there's not only another way, but a better way to rediscover some of the things that we didn't appreciate enough prior to the Second Vatican Council and restore it.
Now, Rob Royal, part of what Cardinal Ratzinger, now Pope Emeritus Benedict, did was institute the extraordinary form of the Mass and raise it aside the Novus Ordo, the new Mass, not to placate one or the other, but to show the continuity between the two. Still, there were many bishops and many cardinals who simply did not implement it, did not make the old Mass available to their people. What do you think the new Pope will do in this regard?
Well, we don't know who the new Pope is yet, so we don't know what he's going to do. But I would just add to something that Father just said, that if one of the deep questions here is the question of continuity, as you just said, as opposed to discontinuity, and of course that's been a great debate in the Church for some time since Vatican II, but brought to a point by Benedict XVI in a way that I don't think his predecessors have quite brought it to, that he believes in a council of continuity, that the Church is still the same Church that it was for the past 2,000 years.
Right.
For many people who walked into a church once the liturgical radicalism had occurred, you had to say that something had changed. And I think that the idea that everything was up for grabs was transmitted for most people, because most people don't study these questions, by the fact that the liturgy had changed so much. So although this may seem to some people like, this is on the side, it's extraordinary, that's the Novus Ordo, we've not got an Anglican ordinary yet, we've got the extraordinary form. And the new translation, these things are not small matters. They go very deep into reminding people about the fact that the church is new, but it is ever the same.
It is also something that is in the mouth and the heart of every Catholic around the world. So it no doubt will have that enormous spiritual effect that frankly you can't trace right now. You just don't know at this point. But I think the fact that he's laid down these markers for reverence and sacrality in the Mass, whatever Mass you're attending, those will no doubt stretch on, and I'm sure the new Pope will at least honor them, I would imagine.
Pope Emeritus Benedict will have an enormous influence in the candidates for the priesthood who are presently in seminaries, as well as over those who have been ordained in the last 8 years, because he set a real standard of the way to pray the Mass. He talked often in his discourse to priests about what he called the ars celebrandi, the way to celebrate the Mass, so that the words that you're saying actually take on your own flesh. That normally when we're speaking, well, we think before we speak, but with the prayers of the Mass, we have the words before they come back to our thoughts. And the more we're able to imitate Pope Benedict in his example and pray in the Mass well, the more that transformation of the human person through the Mass, and the more the unity that comes about when we pray as one body, one spirit in Christ, will redound to the betterment of the Church.
Excellent. Cardinal Francis George of Chicago directly addressed the ongoing clerical sexual abuse crisis and how the next Pope should address it. This was during one of those press conferences we spoke about earlier. And the sex abuse crisis continues to be a centerpiece of the reporting surrounding this conclave. Listen to Cardinal George's response to a journalist's question.
In the hearts of many of us, because we have victims now of sexual abuse, and they're not just the victims of sexual abuse by teachers or politicians or even fathers or uncles. They've been abused by a Catholic priest, and sometimes by a Catholic bishop, and sometimes the abuse has been not addressed as it should have been by Catholic bishops. That is a terrible wound on the body of the Church, and it has to be looked at. I think that when we came over here, a small delegation after we passed the charter, and wanted to put it into the Code of Canon Law, because the Code of Canon Law didn't provide for permanent dismissal from the priesthood because of this delict, this crime. There were reasons why it didn't. We came and said there must be zero tolerance. It took a while to introduce those norms, first of all for us in the United States, and now those norms are universal for the whole Church.
Interesting point there that Cardinal George made. He pointed to the universal law. There is the universal law now in place. Talk to me a bit about what Pope Benedict did to reform this process, and then I want you to reflect on Cardinal George's answer and how important it is to have someone in the clergy, particularly a cardinal, address this at this time.
Pope Benedict's leadership during his papacy was specifically to take what had been done in the United States and say that every Episcopal conference across the globe needs to submit not necessarily the exact same legislation, but they have to have a concrete policy to make sure that we prevent this terrible evil done to kids by those who are wolves in shepherd's clothing rather than loving.
No, it wasn't. We should stipulate it wasn't kids. 10% of the cases were kids. 60% were teenagers and gay in nature, and then you had heterosexual attacks, the other 30%.
But at the same time, all children of God, all horrible, should have never occurred.
Absolutely.
And so the fact that Pope Benedict was insistent that every national bishops' conference come together, think exactly about what it wants to do, and be implemented, send it into the Vatican, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith that he used to lead, was a huge step forward, because certain nations wanted to pretend as if it were just an American problem, and then an American and an Irish problem. But we know this extends wherever sin extends, which is on all the continents of the planet.
Rob Royal, what is the obligation of the next Pope, and is the next Pope the one who might finally begin to put an exclamation point or a period at the end of this clerical sexual abuse story we've been hearing for now almost more than a decade?
Well, it's going to hurt, and it's going to take dedicated efforts to make sure that this happens in the way ways that it has to happen. But unless this gets cleaned up, we go on and on and on with this festering sore in the church that we simply have to put behind us. It's going to take a while. Justice has to be done both to the victims and to the alleged perpetrators. But this is a process that those of us now alive are going to be watching for some years. And if the next pope does not take this on, then I think we have an even bigger problem. I like to quote the American poet Ezra Pound, who once said about the Catholic Church that any institution that could survive the picturesqueness of the Borgias has a certain native resilience to it. So, is this going to hurt? Is this going to damage the Church in the short term? It may. But this is why the Church survives for 2,000 years, because it's based on Christ, number one, and secondly, it's based on truth, and it seeks to embody that truth in the way that it goes about living its life. And we just know that this must take place.
I want to introduce the audience to a figure who is going to figure prominently in the coming days. The Camerlengo, the Chamberlain running the Vatican during this period, is Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone. He is the former Secretary of State. And during an interview a few years ago, we talked about the sex abuse crisis and its root cause. Here's Cardinal Bertone.
In my mind, I think one of the root causes has been the lack of solid formation in the formation of priests and in seminaries. In any case, I repeat,
I sacerdoti che si sono macchiati di un delitto così grave
the priests who have been marked by this particular crime or stained by this particular crime represent a small minority of the greater picture of the priesthood. That certain people were admitted to orders that they should not have been admitted.
Intransigenti e seguire la via più sicura. Nonostante questo,
despite this, how many priests, even in the United States,
sono stati fedeli,
how many thousands of priests in the United States have been faithful,
sono stati coerenti con
and they've been
l'impegno e con l'ordine
consistent and faithful to the orders they've received.
Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone there, the Secretary of State. Now, he has had a sort of rocky tenure as Secretary of State. He was very close to Pope Benedict at the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, just over our shoulder here. Let's talk for a moment about his comments as well as his tenure as Secretary of State.
Well, I think what he said there was accurate, but I'm not sure it's the best message for the Church to be putting forward. And many people have many objections about the way that as Secretary of State he's operated. There are a lot of people who are hurting out there. And yes, it's only 3%, and it's not any greater than, say, Boy Scouts or school teachers or whatever. But these are Catholic priests.
Right.
And I don't think it helps to give the impression that you're apologizing for a group of men who admittedly were sinful and weak, or maybe should never have been admitted to the seminary in the first place. But maybe in a way this is somewhat emblematic of the problem. There's a certain tone deafness here. There's a lack of focus on the need to do something about the problem that exists. It's mentioned, but you don't sense the energy is behind that reform effort as much as it is sort of explaining. And that gets you into a lot of trouble very fast.
Father Landry?
He is certainly not in denial of the problem, just like Pope Benedict. He was at the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and every Friday, as we would pray the Sorrowful Mysteries, they were looking over all the files of all the naughty priests throughout the world, and so he's clearly not in denial of the issue. And I think he does identify the importance of priestly formation, because the generations where you find most of the incidents of abuse were coming where their chastity formation was the old Latin aphorism, nunquam duos semper tres, never two people alone, you always got to have a third, because we almost anticipated something evil might occur. And so there needs to be far better formation than that, and thanks be to God that is happening in seminaries today, but there also needs to be a much greater series of investigations to make sure that we've got somebody not only who won't harm the young, but in a particular way who is thoroughly integrated so that he's able to serve others with the heart of the Lord.
We learned at the press conference today, and switching back to these pre-conclave meetings of the cardinals, we learned that 16 cardinals stepped forward to speak on ecumenism, the poor, the qualities that the next pope must have. some cardinals are quoted, now granted they're unnamed cardinals, but in La Stampa today, they said that one cardinal said, this feels like a synod with the dicastery, the heads of the various Vatican offices, speaking to us. What is that dynamic like, and what are your concerns about what may or may not be happening in that meeting?
Well, I would like to see some more pointed questions, and some of the reports that we're getting also say that there have been questions about Vatican finances, about specific names of people who were participants in the VatiLeaks scandal that, of course, harmed Benedict's papacy a great deal. Those larger questions seem to me to be filler questions, and for people who don't know what a synod is like, there are long speeches. This is very much all'italiana. It's in the Italian mode where every person gets up and gets to deliver a long speech so that they are all on the record, and then the other work takes place in the background when they meet in smaller groups. So there's a certain lumbering quality, if it indeed does have that synod feel to it, that at this moment in the history of the Church, I don't think serves us. We need those sharp focuses on specific things, because they are going to vote very short, within a matter of days.
I spoke to a couple of cardinal electors today, and their concerns are that we are seeing a framework here where the Curia, that needs the reform in the minds of so many of these electors, they're driving the agenda of these meetings, and it's very frustrating to these men. They want to have conversations about the next pope, what's needed, what we need to do in our countries, and what this pope must respond to. They feel they're getting mired and bogged down in bureaucratic reports from the various offices. Is that a good thing?
Well, I think it's necessary, if they're going to be seeing the state of the Church throughout the world, to hear reports. But the way many of the prefects and the presidents of these congregations and councils make their reports is they start at A to get to Z. These cardinals know what the issues are. They should be starting at X to get to Z, to talk about the real challenges rather than just going very slowly through all of this. That's, I think, what's driving the frustration we heard in that cardinal who broke his oath to speak to La Stampa.
And to step back from this, it seems, if we can accept what Rob said a minute ago, you're filling time. If you're filling time with this, you're taking that time away from an honest discussion of who are we going to elect to the papacy. And as that prolongs, it gums up this process. It makes it more difficult for them, frankly, to go into that conclave. So we will leave it there. Rob Royal, Father Landry, thank you for being with us. Up next, just why were the American cardinals and all the cardinals silenced by the General Congregation this week? We'll share our thoughts, and Father Gerald Murray will join us when The World Over Live continues from Rome. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the special World Over from Rome. As we await the conclave to elect the 266th Roman Pontiff, joining me once again is the president of the Faith and Reason Institute, Dr. Robert Royal, and at the end of the table, Father Gerald Murray, a canon lawyer and pastor of the Church of the Holy Family in the Archdiocese of New York. Great to see you both. Thank you for being on board. Father Jerry, let's talk about the reports we've been hearing about the delay over setting a date for this conclave. Now, the last elector arrived from Ho Chi Minh City today. Was it part of the motu proprio, the particular law governing this rule, that all the electors had to be present before this could be decided?
Yes, the original constitution governing this conclave issued by Pope John Paul II specified that it would be 15 days after the Holy See became vacant. That would be the earliest day for having the conclave. Pope Benedict modified that law, left it up to the cardinal electors to make the change, but only when all the cardinal electors were present in Rome, and then they made that decision to do it.
So we still aren't certain whether we'll get a date anytime soon, but
if they decide tomorrow, if everyone's present, they decide they'd like to advance it, then it would happen. But if some of the cardinal electors objected, chances are we'll be starting on the 15th.
Before we open this up a little wider and get to the press conference debacle with the U.S. cardinals making statements and the Holy See press office not happy about it and some of the cardinals unhappy about it, let's talk about the title Pope Emeritus. Apparently, according to Italian media, and we can't confirm these reports, Cardinal Ouellet and Cardinal Burke stood up and spoke within the congregation about the title Pope Emeritus, which Benedict claimed for himself. Where did this come from, and why is this a controversial point among not only some of these cardinals, but many people I've spoken to in Rome?
In canon law, when a bishop retires from his diocese, he continues to be called Bishop of New York, but for instance, in my case, Archbishop Emeritus. And in the former canon law, you would be given a titular see. You would lose the title of Bishop of a certain diocese. What they're doing with the Pope is extending that to the Bishop of Rome. I know that this was controversial because that's one of the thoughts I had talking to another canon lawyer when it was announced. You want to avoid the impression that there are two popes. So using the title Pope for a man who isn't the Pope, even though it's simply an honorific referring to historical status, it's problematic. I think that's not a controversial statement. It's simply a canonical and historical observation. People should be clear. Pope Benedict and Pope Emeritus Benedict is no longer Pope. He doesn't share in the authority of the Pope. He doesn't exercise it. Calling him Pope Emeritus, it's a nice honorific, and I can understand why it's done. I would have counseled against it.
What would you have called him if you were counseled?
Yes, I would have called him the Bishop of Rome Emeritus or former Pope, just simply Archbishop or Bishop Ratzinger would have even been more to the point.
Rob, let's talk for a moment about what we're hearing today. The American cardinals have been doing their own press briefing. Really, it's a press avail with a couple of cardinals each day to take the media's questions. It started with a pool of American reporters. It quickly metastasized into the world press because they were the only cardinals and the only group of cardinals offering such a press avail. That has been shut down. Your thoughts on why? The reason originally given was this was a way to stem the leaks we've seen in the Italian media.
Yeah, I don't know that I would quite characterize this as being shut down. I think they just agreed, along with their brother cardinals, that they didn't want to keep making these splashes out there in the media. Now, La Stampa, one of the Italian papers, said today that the Americans have been criticized because they make themselves available and they're actually cooperative with the press, which is very different, than a lot of organizations which try to protect themselves. And the church, of course, has this self-protective attitude as well. But it's curious that the Americans spoke openly about things that were not controversial. They spoke openly, and people could inspect what they said and compare and judge things. Whereas what happens among the Italians is no one is openly stepping forward, but everything is somehow spilled out through gossip in the Italian press. We almost hear live feeds from these general congregations.
Transcriptions.
Yes, on specific points. So, in a variety of ways, this shows a gap across the Atlantic of just different ways of operating in public where Americans, it's a different way of being. We just tend to be more confident and open about doing things in public, and other people have a different approach.
Father, does this bespeak the divide, if you will, between the Curialists, those who work in the Vatican bureaucracy, and those cardinals who are a part of it, and the rest of the world, and the way they conduct their outreach to the media and their flock?
Well, it does reflect a curial way of presenting information from the Holy See. There's one official spokesman, and then cardinal prefects can speak about matters under their competence.
Right.
But anyone below that level is not generally speaking to the media. I think Bob's point is very accurate. The American cardinals have a very heightened sense of accountability to American Catholics for their actions. And I think it's very praiseworthy. Secrecy is necessary, but discussing, as I went to that presser on Tuesday, discussing general concerns, things of interest, and then also answering legitimate questions from the media, that doesn't betray the mission that we're trying to accomplish here.
No. I would argue, as a member of the hated denizens, when you engage the media and give them an honest answer, you then drive that story in a positive direction in a way that suits you. And if people are worried about the new evangelization, we keep hearing this over and over again, why not continue to engage the media? But for the moment, that has been shut down. Here is Father Lombardi. Now, he is the official spokesman of the Holy See Press Office, and Father Tom Rosica is interpreting for him. He's the assistant to Father Lombardi. Give a listen to their explanation of what happened here and their approach to the Americans' daily parallel press briefing.
Lombardi and I and Father Jill have nothing against the American cardinals, nor against the Italian cardinals. If someone knows who leaked the information from the Synod Hall, it would be good to tell us or to make it known to others. But our role here is to say that the cardinals know what their conduct should be, they have responsibilities, they should abide by that, and if they're wrongly disseminating information, that is on their conscience, and that's up to them.
Your immediate reaction, Bob?
Well, I'm kind of flabbergasted by this, because actually one of the difficulties is the longer that this period goes on without real news, nature abhors a vacuum, and obviously what we're going to see is all sorts of speculation and gossip and, who knows, scandal mongering, because people want attention and people want to play.
If you don't give the media a story, they will find one or create one. We all have deadlines. I mean, we're doing live shows here throughout the week. We may be reduced to doing pasta recipes here if we keep this up. You know, there has to be someone addressing and speaking to the various concerns that arise among the world media. And I think a daily press briefing may or may not cut it.
We have a situation now where you're going to have two sources of information. The official spokesman of the Vatican, who is giving legitimate, good information, but it's only a partial recap. And then you have the leaking, which is going to continue, I hate to say it, unless something really changes. The people who could authoritatively speak about what they view as important for the development of this process, and then for the interests of the Catholic people in general, they're now out of the loop. That's not healthy.
Father, we heard Father Lombardi reference, or Father Rosica in this case, reference the oath of secrecy that the cardinals take. Speak to that oath of secrecy.
I looked at the oath before the show. It's very specific. They're not allowed to discuss things related to the election of the Pope and reveal what was described. But to the general concerns of the College of Cardinals as expressed in these meetings are being referenced by the official spokesman. They're talking about the topics and they're talking about the span of interest. If the spokesman can talk about it, why can't the people doing the talking also refer to that? That's only for the benefit, I think, of all the cardinals, that they can gauge that the public shares that interest.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, someone has joked about this, that it's quite ironic that the only people who can't speak are the cardinals.
The people involved.
Yes, that the press and leakers and Vati leakers and all sorts of other people are out there.
Well, you mentioned Vati leaks. We should at least reference this. There was a report today that there are a group of leakers and moles who are prepared to come forward with a new cache of letters and documents that were, I imagine, taken over a long period of time, and that they want to do their document drop now. How will that be? I mean, obviously the world's attention is looking. We talked about a media vacuum. Does that begin to fill the vacuum, and how good is that?
I have to say I'm a little skeptical of this. I think if they had some blockbuster stories, we would have known about it these past 18 months or however long it's been that the Vati leaks has been going on. This, too, may be a play for media attention. I have no doubt that there are moles in the Vatican and there are others who would like to leak documents. But I think we want to wait and see where that one is going to go. But certainly it's a concern, and I'm sure that many in the Curia are quite nervous over this.
Outside manipulation of conclaves is a long historical fact, and we thought we were past that in the 20th century. And if that happens, as I'm skeptical too, but if it does happen, it's outrageous, because it's manipulation of this most solemn process for choosing a new pope by people whose self-interest and whatever is prevailing over the good of the church. This is horrible.
Yeah, there really is a balance here, and we, over the next week or 2 weeks, we don't know how long this process is going to go on. It's important, I think, to strike that balance, because it is both, there is a human dimension to this, but there's also that solemn and spiritual dimension that can be lost sight of when you're talking about Vati leaks and cardinals speaking out of turn and shut down press conferences. I mean, it's stuff that makes our hearts pitter-patter, but it isn't really central to what this is all about.
And that's why yesterday's event was so good, where the cardinals came together and prayed before the Blessed Sacrament in St. Peter's.
Great image.
One of my friends wrote to me and said, the image of powerful men on their knees is the most powerful image coming out of Rome.
Well,
yeah, and I think that this is going to have to be on the agenda for the next pope. It's not as if there's a magic formula that's going to make the church palatable or acceptable to a lot of the people who object to what the Catholic Church stands for. But at least we can do better. At least we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. At least we find some sort of mechanism that really addresses the moment in which we find ourselves right now.
And you think the election of one man can accomplish that as Pope?
Well, I don't know if we can accomplish it, but we can at least see it as a problem that needs to be addressed. There have been some steps taken in the Vatican press office to try to minimize discontinuities, different offices that are working against one another, or perhaps are ignorant of what other offices are doing. That's happened quite often recently. But there has to be a rethinking of this from the ground up to deal with the way that the church exists in the modern world, which is in this instantaneous electronic media where everything is immediately under scrutiny.
Yeah, yeah. I wrote in this Rome diary that I've just started, I'll talk about in a little bit. It seems the division that's taking shape here, if I'm reading it right, and I admit I might be reading it wrong, it doesn't seem to be along the old left-right ideological lines. It seems to be the establishment and the curia against the outsiders, if you will, and the cardinals from the rest of the world. Do you see that dynamic? Certainly there's a concern about corruption, kickbacks, and the rest happening here in the governance of the Vatican. And that doesn't mean at the highest levels. It's in the middle to the lower levels where a lot of this is happening.
Well, this is the big question on the table. There's a report sitting in a safe in the papal apartments, which will be seen only by the next pope.
Yeah.
And that's in the background of people's thoughts. Now, whether that's motivating the curial faction to try and marginalize outside bishops, I don't know that to be the case. I think there's a certain, let's say, nervousness that given this unexpected abdication, given the situation that many of the cardinals have only been in office for a few years or less, where is this going to go? How will it go? I think we can't just impute that there are motives of seeking to control, but on the other hand, there is a desire that a good result come from all of this.
Yeah, I think that one of the mentalities that you discern among the curia is they are in a more defensive mode than we in the United States are familiar with. That our cardinals, Cardinal George, of course, is a very intelligent man, Cardinal Dolan, Cardinal Sean O'Malley, and many others, are in a media environment daily where they know that they're going to have to answer questions, and they develop a habit of maintaining church concerns, learning how to speak to people in public, which is a very useful thing for the hierarchy of the church to learn. I don't think that Rome has quite caught up with that yet. And it's a skill that can be learned. It doesn't mean that you lose control over the processes that the church wants to carry out in its own way. Not everything that is held back from the media is a secret in an evil sense. It's just the deliberations need to be carried out discreetly in any organization.
Yeah, and the message may have varying emphasis from this cardinal to that cardinal, and that's okay. I mean, I think the church is sort of coming to terms with that. Rob, we had a question from one of our email correspondents, and they were asking, and I guess it's in the minds of a lot of people, when we were watching that ceremony the other day from the St. Peter's Basilica, we saw the Swiss Guard, and they were asking, I thought the Swiss Guard only protected the person of the Pope. Why is he protecting these cardinals?
Well, I mean, as you know,
and you wrote the book on the 500th
the 500th anniversary of the Swiss Guard was in 2007. They were founded in 1507. So they asked me to do this. They wanted an American to write it because Americans write books that people actually read.
Oh, well, that's always nice.
There's a very lovely 600-page German tome which I read through. I may be the only person other than the author who read through it. So there's a kind of a scholarly approach to this. But the Swiss play multiple roles. You obviously see them at the entrance and exit points here in the Vatican. They tend to control crowds and they tend to keep order, and it's nice to have them there. And they challenge. One of the things that the young Swiss Guards learn to do is they challenge people who look like they're bishops and trying to slip into the Vatican, but in fact are not. And they have to study faces and be very, very diplomatic and in the way that they approach what they call in Italian the pezzi grossi, the big fish who come in and out. So they're there. They're not really protecting the cardinals, I don't believe. I think that they're there to kind of keep order, keep control, and they're just part of the general operation. I'm going to talk to the Swiss Guard tomorrow. I'm going over to their barracks, and I'll have more for you.
Good.
Maybe,
you know, they're part of the ambiance of the Vatican thing, if we could cop the Catholic thing.
You can borrow that.
But the other question that emerges, I remember reading that John Paul disarmed the Swiss. He didn't want them armed, and they were taught judo, and they had tasers, but they had no pistols.
Actually, I think it was Paul VI.
Paul VI did it.
Who did that? It was that far back. 'Cause Paul carried out a large reconfiguration of the Vatican. He got rid of some of the other honor guards that existed, and he simplified the papal office. He wasn't carried around on the Sede Justitiatoria any longer. So it began then. The Swiss actually are themselves a little bit nervous. Unlike what many people think, the Swiss love guns. They love shooting competitions, and these young guys, they feel that they don't get enough chance to do that, and they would like to really be a more sort of security.
So they're still sort of unarmed, aside from the halberd.
Let's put it this way. After John Paul II was shot, and after a couple of other things that happened, they reevaluated their stances at the checkpoints. They won't quite tell you what that means.
Okay. We shan't press you any further for fear of divulging something we shouldn't. Father Murray, I'm going to leave you with this. We saw Pope Benedict's governance style, which was clearly to focus on teaching, to focus on the reform of the liturgy. Administration wasn't one of the high marks, nor the concerns of the papacy. I mean, it wasn't a major concern to him. What effect will that have on the selection of the next man?
Well, I recently read an article where a CEO was followed around for a week or two, and they wanted to know what he did, and about 90% of his time was going to meetings, which is one of the crucifixions that a leader has to face. I think the next pope will have to spend more time meeting with the people who work for him at the highest levels. And the reason is that informal exchanges, which aren't programmed with a document read to the Pope, those informal exchanges allow you to find out what is actually happening, and also to tell the people who work for you what you want them to do. And then the accountability and seeing them again later, that's how organizations move along. I think that's something that will have to change.
Very good. Father, Bob, thanks for being here, and we will catch up with you in the days ahead. Before we go, this coverage is very special to me, and it's provoked a whole host of dear memories and reminded me of old friends. After a lot of thought, I decided that we will dedicate our portion of the Interregnum and Conclave coverage to my co-host of these events 8 years ago, Father Richard John Newhouse, and to dear Reverend Mother Mary Angelica. Without her, there would be no network, and I know I wouldn't be here. When she chose me 17 years ago, I can't believe it, to lead the news department, she gave me a very clear charge to report the truth in freedom. She would always say that. You're free here. Something she personally cherished. So I dedicate my work here to her. I love you, Mother. And I also dedicate it to the memory of Father Richard John Newhouse. Now here's a taste of the Newhousian depth and wit from 2005. How productive is all of this, do you think?
Oh, well, what do you mean how productive?
I mean,
this is how the
People...
Holy Spirit is going to choose a pope. And when we say that, some people object when you say that the Holy Spirit is going to choose him. They'll say, well, did the Holy Spirit choose Alexander VI, for example, one of our less edifying...
But Cardinal Ratzinger himself has not been very high on that notion, though. He too
Cardinal Ratzinger has explained very, very well. What are we promised when we say that this is guided by the Holy Spirit? We are promised that no pope will be elected who will be capable of destroying the Catholic Church or betraying what we call the deposit of faith that is given us by revelation by God through Christ in the Scriptures and in the Spirit-guided tradition of the Church. So of that we are absolutely confident. So what do you mean, will this produce anything? It will produce the 265th successor to St. Peter, who will be Peter among us.
What they're doing will produce it. But all of this back and forth, it might be this guy, it's Daniels, it's going to be Maradiaga, it'll be the other guy.
You know, some people will say, well, the Holy Spirit is working through all this despite the fact of egos and ambitions and maneuverings and counter-maneuverings. Well, it's not despite all that. That's precisely the means whereby the Holy Spirit is working. If one has a Catholic sensibility, which is to say an incarnational sensibility, you don't expect God to do things, you know, zapping from the skies. God has become a human being, and through his body, the Church, he works his purposes, and he works his purposes through us and through these cardinals who are the senior bishops of the Church.
He is missed, but our co-hosts this time are up to the task and will strive mightily to fill Father Newhouse's shoes. You better be up to the task. Father Richard has also inspired me to take up his Rome diary. In 2005, he kept an ongoing online diary each day, which he labored over between broadcasts. I will attempt to bring you the same unvarnished insider take on the day's events and perhaps share a few things you aren't hearing. The diary can be found at raymondarroyo.com and on my Seen and Unseen blog at EWTN.com. Rob Royal, also at thecatholicthing.org, has his own ongoing diary of sorts for each day. Well, that is all the time we have. Join me in the days ahead for our portion of EWTN's coverage of the interregnum and conclave. In addition to the world over, we'll be bringing you a daily show live from the Vatican with yours truly. The show always continues on Facebook and Twitter. Go to raymondarroyo.com. The Twitter and Facebook pages are linked on the left-hand side of the site. Tell me what you think of our show tonight and the coverage thus far, and we'll take your questions at conclave@ewtn.com. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and my co-hosts, as well as the rest of the crew at EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Good night from Rome. We'll see you next time. Bye now.